Welcome to Finding Hope, The End to Suffering. Hosted by psychologist, author, and co-founder of the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership, Dr. Barry Weinhold, with national radio host, award-winning producer, and inspirational speaker, Patricia Raskin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Patricia Raskin, and hello, Barry.
Hello.
Barry Weinhold. We're the co-hosts of Finding Hope, The End to Suffering. And so happy to be here and be your co-host, Barry, and share this amazing experience with all of these guests that you have on that really help people find hope and end suffering.
It's a real inspiring venture. I mean, I get inspired every time I talk with these people. They've done such remarkable things in their lives, and to be able to share all those with our audience is just a treat.
And today's guest is Gail Furguson. She's a best-selling author. She's an award-winning journalist, a speaker, a podcaster, a certified peer recovery coach. Her book, she has a book, but her program is The Butterfly Effect, and it offers peer-to-peer coaching specializing in recovery from codependency. You can certainly subscribe to her newsletter at butterflyeffect.com. And she has a new book as well. And it's the same thing. It's called The Butterfly Effect, but it's actually called Butterfly Rising, A Journey to Love, Healing and Freedom from the Cocoon of Codependency. So really excited to have Gail on a little bit later. And Barry, talk about why you chose Gail and this particular topic for this show today.
Well, I've spent a lot of time studying something I call intergenerational family patterns. And I've written a number of books about it. I wrote a series of 4 books on that topic, and then I wrote some more about it because basically what I see is that what happens to people is that they get caught in a web of beliefs and behaviors that is transmitted from one generation to another without even much break. I mean, there's the kind of story that I often tell. It's a common story, but this daughter is cooking a ham, and her mother's overseeing her process, and she said, "Oh, you've got to cut that in half." And the daughter looks at her puzzledly and says, "Well, why?" "Well, that's the way my mother did it."
Mm-hmm.
And so eventually she gets to talk with the grandmother, and she said, my mother told me that you always cut the ham in half when you cook it. Why do you do that?" And the grandma says, "Because I didn't have a big enough pan."
Mm-hmm.
So if people don't understand the reason why the behavior is there, they just repeat it.
Yeah,
And
over and over. And sometimes they don't even question it, right, Barry?
no,
They just repeat it.
So, and also what one of the themes that we've talked about in this show is that what happens to people if they don't get it and they don't understand the reason behind something that they saw their parents do or say, the natural learning style of human beings is to repeat that. And so it's almost like I have to repeat it until I really figure it out, till I understand it. And so anything that was said or done to you as a child that you didn't understand, but you just sort of went along with, you're likely going to repeat that in your own relationship. I know even sometimes when you know it isn't easy to break it. I remember myself saying, "Gee, I don't want to do what my parents did to me, or I don't even want to say the things they said to me in the heat of battle with when they were punishing me for something." But then I became a parent, and guess what? I did the same things and
Mm-hmm.
said the same words, and I went, "Oh my God, what am I doing?" I suddenly woke up to that. But some people don't even wake up to that. But so it's these patterns are powerful. I wrote the one book that's the most common one is Breaking Free of Addictive Family Patterns, and that one is and healing your own inner child, because I think that's part of breaking that intergenerational web that people get caught in. And I think Gail's going to talk about that and about
Mm-hmm.
the generational web that she got caught in and how she was able to extricate from that
Mm-hmm.
in such a way that there was a lot of healing of her own inner child in that process.
Barry, can this be not just, for example, in this case, alcoholism, but it could be substance abuse? Could
And,
it be
and
even behavioral addiction,
yeah,
codependency, or being with a narcissist?
I
Could it
came
be
up,
that as well?
yeah, I came up with 12 intergenerational patterns that are pretty common. I've tested this not only in this culture but other cultures, and these are pretty common. To It's a developmental approach to understanding addictions, and it has basically 12 intergenerational family patterns. There we go. And the first one is that 10. What happens is that the conflicts you had with your parents that never got resolved will again show up in your current adult relationships.
Hmm.
Keep that on the screen, Ben, because
Hmm.
I want to talk about each one of those.
Yeah.
Um, so that's the main kind of, that's not, there's like three very general patterns, and then under those there's kind of specific sub patterns, but it adds up to be 12 different patterns that people repeat in each generation. And in alcohol, particularly alcoholic families, one of the things that keeps those going is family secrets. That a lot of alcoholic families, uh,
Yeah.
the message is don't see what you're really seeing, and don't tell anybody what you're seeing.
Mhm.
And so it's like a secret.
Mhm.
So under the first one, of course, there's what I call the parental disapproval syndrome, where you tend to disapprove of things in others that you heard your parents disapproving of or disapproving in you. Also, some people under that pattern have a need to get revenge on their parents, and that's a self-defeating kind of pattern. When I talk with my clients, I say you got two choices: try to get revenge on your parents or grow up. Which do you want to do? If you want to get revenge on your parents, I'm not the person to help you with that. If you
Mhm.
want to grow up, I'm the person to help you with that. And then the third one is the self-condemnation. A lot of people really beat themselves up about things that were said to them, and they took them in and believe that they're really true of them, but they're really not. The second pattern then is the repeat of codependent patterns, and Gail's going to talk a lot about that. And one of the under those three, that specific one, the three specific ones under the general pattern are acting weak and helpless. People who are codependent often will act weak and helpless to get people to take care of them,
Mhm.
or they have a belief that life is a struggle, and they act out that belief, and they're constantly having life happen to them or happen against them, and they have to struggle against things that happen in their life. And then the last one, which is a very interesting one, is there's often sexual repression in codependency and that pattern. And then the third one, the general pattern, is living out your parents' relationship, and
Hmm.
that's the most difficult one to see, because obviously our model for relationship was the model we saw our parents have. And
Mm.
so it would be only natural that we would try to live out what we saw as the best parts of that relationship. But in a way, it puts a box around our own
Mm.
creativity to
Yeah,
develop the relationship we want.
yeah. Barry, how hard is this? If these are lifelong patterns, I mean, do we need therapy? Do we need group support? All of the above. I mean, because some of these, as you've said, they're lifelong, and you can find yourself in your 50s, 60s, and 70s still acting out those patterns from childhood. So, how do you finally really break them? I know Gail will talk about this.
She'll talk about that. But what I found is that the first step is awareness.
Right.
To know that this is a pattern, and you connect the dots with, okay, what I'm doing here in with my family was done to me when I was growing up. That's
Mm.
the big one. If you can connect the dots, you're about 90% out of it, because then you have the choice. If you're not aware of it, you have no choice. And the second thing is that what seems to be important in changing and breaking the pattern is to be able to understand the negative effect it had on you. Because sometimes, even in alcoholic families, and Gail may talk about this, is that if you're having a relationship with an alcoholic, it's not always bad. There's good times when they're not drunk. And so you kind of excuse the bad times and you kind of make some kind of inner kind of resolution of all that with yourself and say, well, sometimes she's not the way I like, but other times I get along fine with her and I have a great relationship. So we kind of rationalize our way through it. But basically, that then covers over the negative effect that that toxic part of the relationship has had on you. And then eventually it catches up with you at some point. And I think Gail, I read her book and she's going to talk about that, how it finally caught up with her. But
Mhm.
and then Ben, if you throw back the image, I want to just talk about the last uh, 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 ones. Is uh, one of the things that happens under this general pattern is that people become parentized, and by that I mean that if there's discord between the couple, the parents, the child often plays the role of one of the parents that the other doesn't get along with, and it becomes a triangle, and also they then have to sacrifice their own childhood to take care of the parent. They become parentized. They become somebody that the child or the parent confides in inappropriately about problems they're having with their spouse, their mother or father. And so it's a very destructive pattern. And people understand that and the effect that's had on them. That's a big one. And then there's a lot of people, have a fear of success.
Mhm.
Think that that would not be a big one, but I found that to be extremely important that people, kind of the success is defined by how your parents defined success. And if you exceed that, you're out in the no man's land. You're in an unknown place, and often there's a big fear that God. And I've seen this in action many times that people who are we had people come to buy our house once, and they just loved the house, and they were ready to they had even seen where the furniture fit and everything, and they brought their parents then to visit. Well, the parents didn't have anything good to say about the house because the house
Mhm.
was actually bigger than the parents had, and the parents did not want their child to have the house bigger than they had,
Interesting.
and so they ended up not buying the house.
Mm.
The last one is the fear of the unknown, which is the huge one. I mean, how many unknowns do we have in our life?
Mhm.
The future, basically. Nobody knows what the future is going to
And
be because
even more so now with what we're going through with COVID.
absolutely this time of crisis and
Yeah.
chaos. Uh,
And, we think we're through it, and then now another variant comes in, and we think we're, finished with the masks, and we may not be. So it's very
yeah,
unsettling for all of us.
that is transmitted intergenerationally. If your
Mm.
parents had fears of the unknown, you're likely to have similar fears of the unknown. Whatever their fears of whatever
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
unknown, you will likely adopt similar ones.
Right.
And
So,
even to the point where there are family death patterns. People die at around the same age because that's the family pattern that die
mhm.
at a certain time, or they get certain illnesses because they say this just runs in my family. I've had clients
Interesting.
who told me many times, and with work with me, they've cured whatever the illness was
Mm.
because they broke the pattern.
Mm. And we're going to, speaking of that, Barry, we're going to be talking to Gail about this. So we can bring Gail on, and because she's going to talk so much about breaking patterns and codependency and what she went through and how she actually has really healed herself, and now she's helping to heal thousands of other people.
I'm really anxious to have her tell her
All
story.
right.
I read her book and it's powerful.
Right. So our guest, I know we're going to bring Gail in. Our guest is Gail Furguson Jones. And before we finish this segment, we're going to introduce Gail to everyone. She has a brand new book, which is called Butterfly Rising. And it's a journey to love and healing and freedom from the cocoon of codependency. And Gail is a best-selling author, award-winning journalist, speaker, podcaster, and certified peer recovery coach. And her Butterfly Effect program offers peer-to-peer coaching, which specializes in recovering from codependency. And we'll talk more to Gail and learn more about her newsletter and her podcast. So we want to bring Gail in with us now to join us. All right.
Gail,
Hello, Gail.
Welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much. I always want to get the story out. Always.
Great. Well, before we start, tell us about your podcast and where that is, just so people immediately will know that you have a podcast.
My podcast, the Butterfly Effect podcast, and the spelling of butterfly is a little different. It's Butterfly, and that is only a hack that I use so that it separates me in the Google list from anything else. There's a lot of stuff on the Google list that says butterfly effect.
Yeah,
So I'm always at the top of the list because of that spelling.
good idea. Good, clever marketing.
So that's why Butterfly effect.com.
Now, you've been listening to Barry and I kind of chat about codependency and what the effects are. So kind of fill in for us a little bit in the beginning to introduce us to your work. And then we'll get into the other segments in future weeks.
Yes. Well, just seeing those 12 points that Barry just made was the second time. When I first went to Codependence Anonymous and they put up the 12 steps of codependency, I was looking in the mirror when I read those 12 steps. And just now, Barry's 12 points, again, I was looking in the mirror at so many things that I didn't recognize in my early life. Because my first experience with an alcoholic loved one was my grandmother, and she had a stroke when I was she had a stroke when I was born, actually, but she had to come to live with us when I was just starting grammar school. And she was there, I would say less than a year, but it was a hellish year. And I was used to peace and quiet in my home. And she brought all the chaos, all the dysfunction. And because my mother had grown up with her, my mother grew up with an alcoholic mother. And my mother was very codependent. She was always the dutiful daughter under very, very trying circumstances. So here I am. I was like in the second grade with a totally out of control alcoholic grandmother who also had the health issues that went with having had a stroke, and a codependent daughter, her codependent daughter, trying to be loyal, caught in the middle between her mother and what's best for me. And it was bad. So my teachers recognized it in school and called my mother about it. And said, this child has gone from the brightest student to very stressed out, very anxious. We don't know what's going on, but we know there's something going on at home. And we're just asking that you make sure that Gail is in a good place, that whatever's going on, you need to take care of it. So my mother had to pass my grandmother on to another relative. But that was my first encounter with just really the chaos, the uncertainty of what every new day was going to bring. You just, never knew. So,
and as a sneak preview to the rest of these interviews that we'll do with you, what were some of those patterns that you repeated afterward, after that whole issue with your grandmother?
Well, the interesting thing is subtle things happen that I couldn't have imagined. So a lot of times my mother and my grandmother were estranged. So now, decades later, after my alcoholic husband dies, now my children and I are estranged. And it all has to do with this dysfunction that went on with their father. So my mother was left all alone to grieve her mother. My grandmother had burned so many bridges that my mother was alone at her mother's funeral. Not one other person there.
Boy, that's
wow.
And that was really, and so as she got older, my mother just passed last year at 94. But as she got older, she was always telling me that she only wanted a graveside funeral, that just don't do anything special. And I really believe it was because she was afraid nobody was going to come to her funeral.
Mm,
You know, there's just subtle things that
right.
don't make sense until you actually see them happen, and
Right.
then you recognize them for what they are.
And it's fascinating because we're going to close in this segment. But Barry, I know you were bringing Gail on to be able to share this amazing story of how she worked through this, and then now is helping so many people. And that's what we're going to cover in our next episodes. Barry, anything you want to add to this before we close?
Fine. I'm looking forward to talking more with you, Gail, and finding out the rest of the story.
And in the meantime, if you'd like to look up Gail's podcast, it's Butterfly Effect, and it's BUTTRFLY, and you can contact her at info@butterflyeffect.com. Again, BUTTRFLY effect.com. All right. Okay. And also Mix and Bandcamp, right, is another one.com. All right. Thank you so much, Gail. We look forward to being with you next time.
Thank you.
All right. I'm Patricia Raskin, co-host with Barry Weinhold, who is the co-host and the founder and the brainchild and creator of this wonderful podcast series, which is called Finding Hope, the End to Suffering. We'll be back with you again next time. I'm Patricia Raskin.
See you next time.
This episode was brought to you by the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership. Find out more about these resources at weinholds.org. Dr. Weinhold is the author or co-author of 75 books on psychology, including his latest book, Get Real: The Hazards of Living Out of Your False Self, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and more. Patricia Raskin is the host of the nationally recognized program, The Patricia Raskin Positive Living Show, and is currently heard on voiceamerica.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. New episodes of Finding Hope, the End to Suffering can be found every Wednesday. If you like the show, please leave a review and give us a rating.